You're listening to Verdigris with Rae and Andi. I'm Andi.
And I'm Rae.
And we have merch. It is on our website at verdigrispodcast.org. And also,
We have social media, so check us out on Facebook and on Instagram, where we show kind of cool pictures. Hi, Andi.
hi, Rae. It's the new year, and we are going to start it off by talking about one of the greatest inventions in the history of the world.
I am so excited to talk about this. I can't even tell you because I talk about it every year in all of my classes. So yeah, it's super important.
Yeah, so we are going to talk about the elevator. When we started this podcast, we did some research and looked at advice on how to do podcasts. And it's all like, make sure that your stuff is ready at least a month early. Make sure you have a script. Make sure you've done the research, blah, blah, blah. And like, listeners, let me tell you, we are not there. We are breaking all the rules today because in December, when we talked about some of our favorite sites, we talked about the Bradbury Building in Los Angeles. And the coolest thing about the Bradbury Building is this crazy atrium with these gorgeous elevators and staircases that creates this birdcage design that's just absolutely out of this world beautiful. And I think we just left inspired. I mean, we were inspired by all of the sites.
Yeah, but we got really fired up to learn more about, or I did, about elevators because I thought I knew about elevators, but then I also thought, I bet I don't know a lot. I just know enough.
Exactly, right? I knew the Elisha Otis story,
Right.
which don't worry, we're going to tell you. And I knew, a few other things, but a lot of my associations with elevators are honestly childhood associations with elevators. So I grew up in an urban environment. I grew up in a building with an elevator. And so for me, elevators were just a thing that, I saw all the time, but always very much piqued my interest, always made me feel very curious. And I just always thought they were very cool. So...
And I did not grow up in an urban environment. I grew up in a split-level house, as listeners probably know. Therefore, no elevator, lots of stairs. But I did, to me, elevators were something that were elegant and exotic because they were urban, right? Because when we went into the city to the department store, they were there, or you went to the doctor's office or any tall building, basically. Like places that weren't in the suburbs were tall and they had elevators, and so it's exciting. I saw them in films, right?
Right.
And I always wanted to be in an elevator that had an operator. Like I just thought that was
absolutely
perhaps the coolest thing ever.
So I have tons of fun childhood memories about elevators, but the one that always struck me the most was that unfolding page in Eloise.
Oh, yes.
So that was
gosh.
always the thing that I just always thought of as this just, first of all, it was one of my favorite books, but second of all, the unfolding of it and like following her path up and down the Plaza Hotel was always just super fun and made me think like, oh yeah, she's a challenged kid. And yeah, so I really loved it. And in fact, it's funny because my older daughter, when she was little, whenever we went to a place with an elevator, she always thought it was a hotel. Like regardless of what it was, she's like, oh, we're in a hotel. And I'd be like, no, we're in, it's an apartment building, or no, it's a, something else. But she was like, no, there's an elevator. It's a hotel. So anyway, elevators are awesome, but they are, well, it's funny because they're both super old and very, very new. So on the one hand, I mean, all you need is a pulley and a box, a platform.
Right.
And you have it's not an elevator at that point. It's a dumbwaiter or a hoist.
I was going to say it's a lift. A
Right.
lot of the research I did, that's what they would call them. It's a lift, right? It's using simple machines, which I love, to be able to haul stuff up higher than you could do if you were just holding it.
Exactly. And I mean, it's as old as time, right? So it was used in ancient times. It was used very much in medieval times. Sometimes you would see these kind of, human-sized hamster wheels to lift up equipment and especially building materials, so for things like building bridges, building cathedrals, that kind of stuff, you would need that kind of machinery. And it's very simple, as you said, well,
Simple machines, that's the term. I mean, they're not
Yeah.
they're not simple, but they, the principle of them is.
Right. But historically, people did not ride on those machines because the rope breaks and then you break.
Yeah, they were
Right.
very, very dangerous. So, in looking at the ancient, I have to go back to the ancient stuff. So, like, there's evidence of using them to build the pyramids in ancient Babylonia and ancient Greece. But the coolest little factoid I learned was in ancient Rome. So while humans didn't ride in them, in the Colosseum, they had ones to move the animals. So, like, like they would just appear. And in particular, they found that they could carry about 600 pounds, which is the weight of 2 lions. Very specific. And that would take 8 men to turn the wheel in order to make them sort of appear out of nowhere, which, must have been just amazing.
Right, bread and circuses, right?
Yeah.
You got to entertain the people. And what's more entertaining than 2 lions just appearing out of,
I mean,
well,
I'm
nowhere.
entertained by reading about it, so I can't even imagine how amazing it would be to see that.
Exactly. So lifts are not anything new at all. But people did not ride in them because, we're still scared of this now with the safety mechanism. So you can imagine that before that, when it was like, oh yeah, the rope breaks or frays or, any part of the machinery fails and you are going to be a splat on the ground. And so people did not ride them ever, ever, ever. It was just too dangerous until our good friend Elisha Otis.
Oh, can I say
Please.
I found this digging very deep. So there was one verified account of a human being riding a lift before Elisha Otis. So, and it goes back to France.
Okay.
So King Louis XV, apparently, in Versailles, had something called the flying chair, which was a lift that would take him from his quarters up to his mistress's quarters on pulleys.
Yeah, okay, that sounds.
So this is 1743. So I'm sorry, I just had to say it because flying chair, like, isn't that the perfect description of it too? But he is the only one that I found evidence before Elisha Otis.
Yeah, that still seems very foolhardy, although, the kings of France did many foolhardy things, sometimes with terrible ends. But yeah, so there were certainly people who did crazy things prior to Elisha Otis and after. I mean,
Yeah.
people did, go down the Niagara Falls in a barrel.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah. Let's not even. Wow.
Yeah, so I mean, people are dumb and do dumb things. But Elisha Otis was not dumb, and he did the thing that changed the world. And so this is the thing. I know I'm an exaggerator by nature. It's okay. I know it. But no, for real though, Elisha Otis changed the world. And by that I mean the built environment as it exists today would not happen without the safety elevator, which he pioneered, right?
100%.
I mean, there have
Yeah.
certainly been tons of
Yeah.
advances since, and we're going to talk about those as well. But fundamentally, the reason that we have cities as we know them today is Elisha Otis.
Because honestly, nobody wants to walk up all those stairs.
Yeah. I mean, it's really that simple, right? So if you've ever wondered, dear listener, why buildings until about the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, why they kind of topped off at 7 stories, maybe if you were really poor and had no other choice, you might be living under the roof. But other than that, no, like rich people lived generally on the 2nd story.
Yeah.
Right. The piano nobile.
Right, because it's dirty on the 1st story, and it's
there's
the
noise.
Least, yeah, and there's least
Randoms.
numbers of steps to get up to the 2nd floor.
Exactly. And so piano nobile means the noble floor, right? The rich floor. So the 2nd floor. But people did not like going upstairs. And if you've ever lived in a walk-up, you know
why.
You might have calves of steel, but also you're going to be cursing the world all the time.
And you probably have very light furniture.
You eat out a lot because just bringing up groceries is awful. So Elisha Otis's invention is going to literally change the world. So let's talk about it. He was an industrialist and an inventor. And his big invention was called the safety elevator. It was patented in 1853. And very importantly, it was demonstrated at the World's Fair at the New York Crystal Palace in 1854. Do you want to talk about that great exhibit that he did?
Oh my God, this is amazing. So I love this. This is like the big drama moment. So Prior to this, as we mentioned, elevators or lifts had ropes, right? And so if one of those ropes broke, it plummeted. So people were fearful of them. If your stuff broke, that was terrible. But, human beings weren't going to get on them. So he was a showman at heart. I think that's really what it comes down to. And so he has this huge audience, and he gets on the lift. And, of course, everybody's nervous because they're all like, oh, this is dangerous, and, this is daredevil. And then he cuts the rope, and his lift falls, oh, my God, like 2 feet. And it stops.
Less than that even.
Less than
yeah.
Oh, okay.
Like less than a couple inches.
Oh, okay.
So the way that this works is, when you think about it, a brilliant engineering response, right? So imagine you have the rope, and the rope is actually attached to a spring, all right? And that spring, when the rope is attached to the spring, that spring is kept in tension. So when it's kept in tension, it's holding these anchors away from the wall. And then on the wall, there's these little ratchet systems. So basically, if the rope cuts, the tension on the spring stops, and the anchors kind of go immediately out because there's no more strength holding them in. And then they're going to attach on those ratchets on the wall, and then it just can't go anywhere. The elevator's just kind of stuck until you put tension back on that spring. So it's super duper simple when you think about it.
Yeah.
I will say the safety systems today are different. So they're a lot more complex. The idea is the same, right? So now instead of one rope, most elevators are held by, first of all, they're steel cables, but second of all, it's like a minimum of 4 usually, and each one of them can hold a full elevator. And that's the minimum usually. Sometimes it's as many as 8 cables per elevator. But regardless, it's kind of the same system that if any of the cables break, if the elevator also goes too fast,
right,
the governor at the top of it just kind of automatically sets off that release, and then the brakes engage. So it's a more complex system now, but fundamentally, when Elisha Otis demonstrates this very theatrically in 1854, all of a sudden people are like, oh,
yeah,
wow. So, we can now have an elevator and not die.
Yeah. Also, I will say a lot of modern elevators, they developed this not long after Elisha Otis. They have a piston system, right? So even if it falls, it's like having a big spring underneath you.
We're going to talk about the different power types in a second, yeah?
Yeah.
It's then installed in the first building for passenger service in the building in New York that I don't like to call by name because I can never pronounce it properly. But it's a great building. It's the Hawat building?
I think that's how you pronounce it.
It's spelled Haughwout building. It was a store.
A department store.
Yeah.
One of the first department stores, actually.
And it is gorgeous. It's still, the building is still out. The original safety elevator is not, but the building is still there. It's in Soho, in New York. It's on Broome and Broadway, I think. And it's also a cast iron facade building, which was very common at that same time.
Yeah, it's a spectacular building because it's got imagine if you go from having to do hand carved decoration to suddenly you can, cast it in a factory, right? And so it has every possible ornate detail glommed onto it. I mean, it's like
every classical order.
Yeah, it's like a wedding cake of a building. I mean, every single, it's like when you doodle and you just keep doodling. This building is just completely doodled with architectural detail. It's fantastic.
It's wonderful. And the cast iron facade was incredibly practical too, because it meant the building was basically fireproof, very, very solid. And actually, so this is where we might get in the weeds a touch, but so elevators are one reason why we are able to have tall buildings. The other reason is steel. And we're gonna get to that in a minute, that you really need both. But honestly, let's start with understanding that it's not even really super tall buildings that we're talking about here yet.
Yeah.
Right? Yes, by the time we get to 1900, especially the early 1900s, it's going to be, skyscrapers that are 20, 30, 40 stories high. But even like a 10-story tall building, like you don't want to be in that building until there's an elevator. It's just not pleasant to be more than 3 stories off the ground, honestly. And if you've ever had to carry stuff up and down, you know what I'm talking about. Like, you're just not going to want to do it. So the elevator really means all of a sudden you can build a 10-story tall building, even without steel. So those early elevators, the very, very early ones, are actually steam powered. Now, those were common in the US. They were phased out relatively early because they're not super practical. I mean, right? It means you need to have a steam engine, like in your building. It's not super helpful. And so very quickly, it's going to go to hydraulic elevators. So I think that's what you were talking about a minute ago. So hydraulic elevators were very heavily used in the U.S. We're going to talk a little bit about France because I can't help myself, but they were and still very heavily used in France.
Okay.
Because hydraulic elevators are really fast, really quiet, and they work super well. They're very easy to make them work way before computers become dominant, and they work with pistons, as you noted. Now, they do have one downside. Well, they have a couple downsides. One downside is you need that piston to go as far down under the building as it goes up in the building. So,
which means a 10-story building is reasonable, but beyond that, not so much.
Exactly. So if you've ever wondered, well, why is it that it's still pretty common in a place like Paris where there's very strict height limits? Well, that's why, but not common at all in places like New York City. Well, because if you've got a 50-story building, you really, really cannot have a hydraulic elevator. It's not going to work. So the idea with a hydraulic elevator is there's that piston underneath the cabin, and that piston is filled with either water or with oil, which does not compress, right? So the idea is you force it into that piston, and then, it has nowhere to go. It has to go up. And so it works very, very well, but it also means that you're using a lot of energy to move the elevator. And so the type that's much more dominant today in the US and really in most of the world, I think, is the electric elevator.
Yeah. And the electric elevator has benefits and also, things that are not as good as that kind of hydraulic elevator. So electric elevators were invented in the 1880s by von Siemens. So you noticed, Otis, we're going to throw around some names that if you are in an elevator and you look down, you'll say, I've seen that. I've seen that name before.
Honestly, 90% of the time in the U.S., it's going to be either Otis or Siemens.
Yeah.
I just can't think of any other dominant company in the U.S. at all.
Yeah. So Siemens invents them in the 1880s, and one of the things, the way it shifts in terms of how the buildings are built is it has to have a huge kind of space on top of the building in order to have not only the electricity source, but where all of the cables are and everything else. So it basically adds almost an entire story on top of really tall buildings, which is better than having to dig down, 50 stories for a piston, but also, kind of gets into these debates about how tall are buildings, right? Is it the habitable space? Is it, all of the things that you have to have on top, everything else? But that, it's not only because it's a lot of energy, because I'll be honest, I don't think they were really too worried about using a lot of energy.
Yeah, they weren't known for being super into sustainability.
No, they were faster. That's really what it comes down to, is that electric elevators, you could call them faster, they traveled faster, which was also a little scary for people, but was more beneficial as we're building taller and taller.
Right. And the electric elevators work the same way as the steam elevators in that they're counterweight systems, right? So the idea is that you have a counterweight. The counterweight is usually, I believe, the weight of a half-full elevator. So it's not quite like a full elevator, but basically they're trying to make it as even with the elevator, understanding that the elevator is going to be a different weight for every single trip, right? So as close to even as possible. And so there's that counterweight system, and then there's those pulleys up in that machine room upstairs that is going to do the bulk of the work. But because the counterweight is most of, or a little bit more than the weight of the elevator, when you're moving the elevator, you really only need to move a fraction of that weight when you think about it, right? So that's how it works. And the electrical system is what powers it after the steam system in the very, very early days. And these days, of course, it's all entirely automated. It's all using computers. But back in the day, it was not. So back in the day, they had an elevator operator who would control the speed of the elevator, right? So almost a train conductor, honestly.
Yeah.
Because stopping at the right floor and stopping like at the level of the floor was not a given the way that it is today. Today, this is all kind of a non-issue, but historically, it was definitely very much an issue.
Yeah, and we didn't have the first operator-less elevator until 1950 in Dallas. So I thought that was pretty cool.
What I find interesting about the operator, too, is that the operator was partially there to make the passengers feel less nervous early on, right?
Yeah.
So early on, people were still very, very anxious about getting on an elevator. I mean, yes, they had seen Elisha Otis do his theater, his theater thing, but fundamentally, people were very, very worried about it. And also, those early elevators, the steam-powered ones, were loud and they were extremely slow. So as a result, they actually set up a lot of those very early elevators almost like living rooms. Like you'd get to like sit down, and it was wood paneled and all of that to try to make it less intimidating, less worrisome. And it's only later on that they got, more narrow.
I think also another thing that people were uncomfortable with in elevators, and this we see in the Bradbury building, and actually a building that I worked in D.C. had these kind of elevators as well. They were glass, and then essentially the area that you went up through is metal, and because people were afraid of being stuck in an elevator, right? So, which seems very reasonable. They are tiny spaces.
Yeah, and I have a picture here. I have a few. I have
same.
many pictures. Let's not pretend. So I have a picture of the Hallwatt building in New York, which we will share with you, of course. The thing that's really cool with it too is because it's cast iron, every floor is like copy paste. It's just you paste the same thing over and over again. But then I also have a picture of a building that's a Masonic building in Chicago, that was built in this era. And you can see in this picture that it's the stairs and it's all beautiful cast iron, ultra decorated, ultra ornate. And it's in this, again, open glassed in enclosure. And on the side of it is the glassed in elevator. So that, again, there's tons and tons of light that comes through so that it's less nerve-wracking to get on the elevator.
Yeah, I have a picture. So I worked in a building called the Old Post Office.
That's beautiful.
And it's hard actually to see even from this image, but it has this relatively, I would say, subdued kind of ironwork, but the sides of the cabin that go up and down are glass. And so unlike most elevators where you get in and kind of, like you just push to the back and you stare at the door, I was really bad about this. Maybe not everybody did it, but I got in and then I would stare at the side because I wanted to see everything go past. And also, this had something that used to be really common, which was the staircase ran around the elevator shaft. So as you were going up in this glass elevator, you could see people walking and you could actually wave at them, which when I got stuck in the elevator once was really important. I was stuck between floors, and I actually had to say, I'm trying to go to a meeting. Tell them I'm stuck.
That's funny. Yeah, I've definitely done the race too with elevators.
Yeah.
Which is it's a risky proposition for sure. Early on in the tall buildings in the U.S. that start getting these elevators, we're going to see really an emphasis on the elevator and on the building itself. I think this is particularly true of Louis Sullivan's buildings. So Louis Sullivan is considered the father of the skyscraper. He did not have a very long career, and he didn't build that many buildings. I mean, he had a very difficult life. But his buildings really are going to set the template for tall buildings, and he really highlighted that top of the building. So he would have there's a flat roof over most skyscrapers. I mean, that's very common. But he had the top story flare out, right? That story that was the elevator machinery, right? So this is not a living story, right? This is a story for machinery and equipment and that kind of stuff. But he had that story kind of flare out so that from the sidewalk you can see it, and there's a very nice kind of punctuation to the building. And his elevators in general, well, I mean all his buildings, but his elevators in general are outrageous.
They
This
are
is
spectacular.
I'm showing Ray right now. I mean, not that Ray hasn't seen it. The elevator for the Guarantee Building in Buffalo, New York, which, I mean, do you want to try to describe it, Ray?
Yeah, so this is interesting. I've been past the outside of the Guarantee Building a few times, and actually, most recently this summer on a trip up to Niagara Falls, and it's a spectacular building from the outside. I've never seen the inside for real. So, what does the elevator lobby look like? It looks like an intricate gold foil design. So it has kind of these brass, they look like maybe they're leaves and vines, and Sullivan was known for kind of doing these very naturalistic kinds of things in contrast to the high technology that he was doing. And so it looks like that, and it's a kind of a grid that's glistening on top of the whole area where the elevator is. So it's this, kind of glowing, warm, inviting kind of space with all this sparkle and in a magical box. I mean, this looks like exactly what you would have imagined people thought of it in the time when he was building, like this magical box that takes me to the top of the building. I mean, it's spectacular.
It is. It's like this beautiful golden filigree.
Yeah.
It's like jewelry. I mean, it really is.
It is.
He really establishes the elevator as part of the building and kind of a component of the architectural structure of the building, which, when you think about it, is kind of revolutionary, right? This idea that, hey, we have a new part of the building that is actually going to become the core of every building into the modern era, and how it's set up, because you would think that there would be two approaches, right, to elevators. One approach would be to hide it somewhere.
Right.
And we'll see that's
Happens.
That's a lot of the approach that actually happened in Europe.
Yeah.
Not everywhere, but we'll go over there. But the other approach would be to just celebrate the elevator and make it kind of this centerpiece, this really emphasized aspect of the building. And that's exactly what ended up happening, right?
Yeah.
Is that because of Sullivan and because of later skyscraper architects, you really see, you walk in and it's the bank of elevators that becomes the atrium.
Yeah.
And that's kind of crazy, right? This entire change in the way that we think of the entrance of a building.
Well, and to kind of take a step back too, so Sullivan creates this language of tall buildings, and so as Andy mentioned, it flares out at the top, but it's actually a three-part design, and so the base is more solid, except for big, windows that are, like pedestrian friendly, right? Like shops and cafes and that kind of thing. But it feels more stout and more solid as a base. And then in between that and the flared top are varying kind of ways of emphasizing that it's tall. And so a lot of Sullivan's buildings in particular have these kind of strips almost of solid material. And when you look at them from far away,
it looks like a column.
It looks like a column. It looks like a fluted column. And so, he's creating this idea of celebrating. I mean, when you look at those buildings from up close, like they look taller than they are, right? Because your eye just goes to the top. And so I think this is all part of that, of celebrating the elevator and celebrating the technology and the advancement, right? It's like, it's so amazing. It's magical. You can go up these 10 stories, so fast. And so I think that's a lot of why.
Absolutely. I mean, and that tripartite division, right?
Yeah.
That base, shaft, capital, which is the language of skyscrapers that Sullivan developed, is still, to this day, the language of skyscrapers. So that brings us to the New York style skyscrapers.
Yeah.
So the first type of skyscrapers are called Chicago style skyscrapers. And Louis Sullivan worked a lot in Chicago and in the Midwest in general. And those skyscrapers, by today's standards, we don't think of them really as skyscrapers because they're like 10, 20 stories maybe. They're not super tall, and they're big rectangles, right? They don't have the Empire State Building setback that we think of as the skyscraper thing. That's going to happen in New York.
Well, and to be fair, there's a reason why
Yes.
they are so short.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Just to defend the Midwest a little.
Oh, no. So, I mean, when you think about it, I always joke about this in class, that the setback in New York is based on a law in 1916 called the New York Setback Law of 1916, because all of these skyscrapers were causing terrible issues with light, air, and terrible wind tunnels. I mean,
Yeah.
it was just awful in New York. And that's due to one fact in New York, which is the blocks are very poorly designed. And I say this as a former New Yorker. They're very long and skinny blocks. The streets are extremely narrow. Having those skyscrapers built became a real health hazard,
Yeah.
a public health issue. And so they set up this setback law to allow light and air to get to the bottom, to the street. And that law is still in effect, by the way.
Well-
But that's why those buildings look the way they do. We're gonna talk about that more in a minute. But to make those buildings, you need steel. So that's the other component. Do you want to talk a little bit about steel?
Yeah. So in Chicago, what they're doing is they are rebuilding after the Chicago fire, right? And so there's a lot of anxiety about, as they're building these taller and bigger buildings, they want to make sure they're fireproof.
That was a big deal. Yeah.
And steel is a new material, generally speaking, for buildings. So there's kind of this push and pull between the architects and engineers who keep saying, we want to build buildings that are steel buildings, and they might have, stone, or they might have brick on the outside. And the client's saying, oh no, I want to have a building that is tall but is structural brick or structural stone, because I know that's solid. And the problem is that, your base has to be big enough to support whatever's on top. So by the time you get to a 10-story building, your first story is solid stone for 12 feet.
So if you get to go to Chicago, listeners, please go to the Monadnock building.
Yes.
So the Monadnock building is the tallest brick skyscraper in the world. And it is a great explanation as to why you cannot build skyscrapers out of brick, because the walls on the first story, first of all, they have to be flared, because they're just, you need to support. It's not that tall a building. It's 18 stories maybe.
I think that's right.
It's not super tall, but it does have the tripartite division.
Yeah, it does.
But at the bottom, the walls are 7 feet thick or something ridiculous.
They're like
that.
tunnels. They look like tunnels.
So first of all, the windows mean that you can't really, there's no light inside. But second of all, the building is so heavy, it's literally sinking.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's another reason that Chicago actually doesn't develop the super talls that they do in New York, right? In my class, I always say they have squishy soil. I mean, they're on the shores of the Great Lakes, which it's a lot further down before you get to bedrock than it is in Manhattan. Manhattan, just think about, Central Park, and there's big boulders. There's rock very close to the surface, and so they can build taller. But anyway, getting back to this whole idea. So there's this push-pull, and they're building in brick and then steel on top sometimes, clients are starting to get comfortable, well, as long as you build me, this base that's all structural brick, maybe you can build the steel on top. And then eventually they get to a full steel skeleton.
Right.
And that's what allows us to build taller and taller and just humongous buildings.
Absolutely. So steel is developed, steel has existed again for a very long time, but to make steel is very hard, because you need to heat the iron and the carbon very, very, very hot in order to make the process work. It's called the Bessemer process.
Yeah.
And so once that technology becomes more common during the, 19th century, late 19th century, then steel becomes available. Now, steel is really great because it's much more plastic than iron. It can move in a way that iron can't. Iron's just going to shatter, basically.
Right.
But steel won't. And then what you need is just add rigidity to the steel. So you do that by creating I-beams, right? So the I-beam makes sure that you use as little steel as you need, but it's very, very strong, very rigid. And then you need to attach the steel to itself. Early on, we're going to use what are called rivets, and usually hot riveting, which is super cool. Today, we use bolts, nuts and bolts. But point is, once you have steel and then the elevator, then you're set. Then you can create a building pretty much as tall as you want, or as tall as is legal, I guess. And so that's exactly what's going to happen, right? So in New York, they're going to have to follow that setback law. So the buildings are going to have that kind of wedding cake look to them. But other than that, they can just kind of build as tall as they want. And at this point, you still need to cover the steel with something to make sure that it's weather safe.
I was going to say, see, that is one of the differences between iron and steel, right? Because you
Right.
have cast iron, and you think about that, like, cast iron lives outside. It might get a little rusty, but generally speaking, it's still going to be strong.
Yeah.
Whereas steel will succumb to the elements much faster, so
Much
it has
faster,
to be
yeah.
protected. So you have a lot of steel buildings that have terracotta or brick or stone or whatever kind of facing on the outside of them. So they look like they're these solid buildings, and yet they're really just this kind of elegant, light kind of cage that supports all of these things that we do in them, which is kind of amazing.
Exactly. This is when Art Deco is going to become dominant, and Art Deco is a style that's very flat, ornate, but very flat, very geometric, and is going to use a lot of things like metals and polished stone and that kind of stuff. And you know what it works really well for? Elevators. So I have some pictures of really cool Art Deco elevators.
Oh,
This
yeah.
one is from the Chrysler building.
Oh, one of my all-time favorite buildings.
Yeah. So it is incredibly elegant. It looks like a beautiful fan, the door. It's like all
Yeah.
inlaid, different, like almost semi-precious stones. But it's very flat, right? It feels like you could just put your hand against it and it would be completely smooth. It's very high polished stuff.
Yeah, and also like moving away from the Sullivan kind of, naturalistic kinds of decorations. This is very geometric. It's very abstract. It's bold, right? High contrast.
And I have a bunch of others here. I have the
Yay.
Empire State
Oh my gosh,
Building
these
and
are
a
gorgeous.
bunch of others. And
Yay.
you can really see how they become much more geometric, much more abstracted. And they look like they're, streamlined, movements, dynamic,
Yeah.
which, is the whole point of elevators.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of fascinated by all this. And one of my big fascinations is with this building. So I'm showing Rae one of my absolute favorite buildings, which is technically called the Industrial Trust Building or something.
Nothing exciting.
Nobody has ever called it that, though. So this is a building called the Superman Building. It's in Providence, Rhode Island.
Which you can see why nobody would call it anything other than that, because that's an awesome name.
It's a great name. It looks like the building that what's the newspaper called in Superman? I'm not a big Superman person.
Ooh, I am not a comics person.
All of the comics people are going
I'm
to be
sorry.
yelling at their
Yeah.
podcast right now. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, you guys. The Daily Planet.
Yes. Oh, you are so good. I was going to Google it.
I think that's what it's called. Anyway, so it looks like that building, but what it really looks is it's a setback building. It
Yeah.
looks like a shorter version of the Empire State Building, right? It has that kind of wedding cake look to it. But what you have to understand is there is no reason for it to look that way, right? There's no setback law in Providence, Rhode Island. There is no need to build it that way. But in our minds, that's what a skyscraper looks like,
Right.
because of New York.
Yeah.
And I have next to it, I don't know if you can see, Rae, an
I
ad.
do, with the elevators. This is so excellent. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So the ad actually is touting the fact that there are different elevators in the different heights, the different portions of the building that have different heights, so that you don't have to ride. You don't have to take the local basically to the the executive suite at the top.
Exactly. And of course, they are Otis, very
Yes.
prominently Otis
Yes.
elevators,
Indeed.
which, makes absolute sense. In fact, so have you ever been to the top of the Empire State?
Yeah. It's been a long time. But
'Cause
yes, I have.
I'm pretty sure that I changed elevators. I think you have
Yeah.
to change elevators
I think you
because of the counterweight system, right? That they can't have it go. You can't go all the way up that way. Also, your ears are going to pop. And
Yeah.
it's really, it's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I learned something too. So 1920s, we've got this elegance and this modern forward, but people are still a little nervous about elevators. And so the 1920s is when they introduced elevator music to also calm people's anxiety, which I thought was amazing.
Yeah. And when you think about it, the way people behave in elevators is very interesting, right?
Yeah.
There's almost always a mirror on the back of the elevator, but people always turn and face forward. They don't look at each other.
Yeah.
There's all this, important social mores that you have to follow while you're standing in an elevator. And, that's fascinating to me because elevators are so new. So all of these ways of behaving in an elevator are in fact very, very new, right? That we've just decided that's how you behave in an elevator, right? Don't push all the buttons. Don't be that person.
Right. Well, and that was why I think I probably was one of the few people, maybe I weirded people out, I don't know, but in the old post office when I would face sideways so that I could see the floors going by, right? Because why would you face a closed door when you can watch stuff out the window? I mean,
absolutely.
But it was definitely not everybody who did that.
Well, actually, this is kind of a fun transition to France elevators. So, I tend to wax poetic about them because, as I said, I grew up in a French building, a 1909 Art Nouveau building, not very tall, only 5 stories, but it did have an elevator. But like many, many French buildings, the elevator in my building was what I would call a coffin elevator. I almost caught Rae drinking water. You guys, I almost got her to just spit her water everywhere.
There was almost water coming out of my nose. Yep.
So it was a coffin elevator. And I have very fond but very detailed memories of this elevator. In fact, one of the big stories that my family always tells is, in French, elevator is ascenseur, which means ascender, right? So same meaning. When I was little, they told me to call the elevator, and I said, ascenseur. They were like, no, press the button, dummy. So anyway, but the elevator that I grew up in this beautiful Art Nouveau building, if you're an adult person, both of your shoulders would touch the sides of the elevator. It had carpet on all sides, which was very weird. This industrial carpet, dark red industrial carpet. And when I was little, it did not have a front scissor door or what's the word? That's not, people don't use scissor doors anymore. The accordion doors.
Yeah.
So they installed accordion doors later on when I was older. But when I was a kid, you would close the door on the outside door, which was flat on the inside, right? And you'd hit the button, and then the elevator would just go, and the wall in front of you would just change,
oh my
right?
Gosh,
and they only
so
had that light at the foot level, so that if you broke that light with your foot, right, then the elevator would stop. But what I used to do is take my hands and go along the wall as we moved up, which is so deeply unsafe. I don't understand. So anyway, a lot of these elevators when I was growing up were so, number one, tiny. They're all tiny. And number two, were just much stranger than American elevators.
Yeah.
And I think the reason primarily is, in most French buildings, elevators were not standard. So hotels and department stores, those had elevators from the get-go, right? So if you go to some of those very fancy, hotels, very fancy department stores from the, late 19th century, then yes, they had built-in elevators from day one. And eventually escalators too.
I want to talk about escalators.
Okay. Well, so I won't steal your thunder. But residences, houses, apartment buildings, they didn't. Even though when you think about it, right, those Haussmannian buildings of the 1860s, elevators sort of existed then, but they were still very rare. And those buildings, it explains why the second floor and the fourth floor were the two really nice floors that people lived on. Right, and the servants' quarters were up underneath the roof, and that really, it's explained by, people didn't want to go up all these floors, but you don't want to live on the first floor. Nobody wants to live on the first floor. But because elevators weren't standard originally, when they actually put in the elevators, they just had to find a place for them.
Right, you have to stuff them in wherever they fit.
You have to stuff them in and hopefully not mess up the structure of the building, right? And so in order to do that, in a lot of places, they just put in the tiniest possible elevator they could. Also, a thing that was super common when I was a kid, and really is in a bunch of French buildings, is the weird elevators that only stop at the mezzanines. Oh. So they stop between floors. They don't stop at the main floor. And that's because it was easier to set up the access to the landing
Oh, okay.
in between the floors.
Yeah.
Because I used to think like my grandparents had that where they lived. And I was like, but why? Because then you have to go either up half a floor or
Right.
down half a
Yeah.
floor.
It's like
And-
creating a split level.
Yes, it is. And I was like, maybe it's for economic reasons. And I was like, no, that's not why. I did a bunch of research. The reason is it was easier to set up. It was less disruptive for the existing structure of the building. And in the very fancy in some of the very fancy buildings, they didn't want randos basically showing up right in front of their door. So that way they have to go up, half a floor up or half a floor down. And their, grand entrance to their apartment wasn't disrupted. So
Wow. That's very cool.
Things I learned. But here,
Yeah.
check out some of these European elevators.
yes.
So
Oh.
not all of them were,
Yeah.
kind of these like afterthoughts. Some of them are just these gorgeous. Again, they look like bird cages.
Yeah, very steampunk. Like, lots of decorative elements, scrolls and swirls and
Yeah, and these are the ones that were common, as I said, in hotels and department stores. But a lot of them, they look like you could just put your fingers through almost any like area and then have your
Yeah.
fingers literally sheared off.
Yeah, it
like
does.
they do not look
Yeah.
safe. They're gorgeous, but they
Yeah.
don't look safe.
That's fair.
But these are the size that I was talking about.
Oh boy. Okay, so now I actually see. Like I thought that maybe coffin was an exaggeration. Dear listeners, these are maybe 2 feet by 2 feet square. Like they really are just like a box that you can fit in, and hopefully you don't have 2 bags of groceries because both of them won't fit.
So, fun fact: when we would come home from vacation, if we had suitcases, the way that you had to do it, if there was more than one person, the first person would ride up the elevator, then the second person would call the elevator down, load suitcases
Yes.
one on top of the other because you can't put them side by
Right.
side. There's no
No.
space.
No.
And then you would have to yell up the stairs, "Hey, call the elevator!" And then so the elevator would ride up
my
with all
God,
your
that's
suitcases.
amazing.
By the way, in France, we still don't use elevators to move.
Oh,
Right. And
yeah.
anyone familiar with the Louvre heist knows exactly what I'm talking about. What they do in France and in, as far as I know, all European cities is they have these trucks with lifts on them. And you actually have furniture come in and out of windows
Yeah.
because there's no way you can use either the stairs, they're usually spiral stairs,
Yeah.
or the elevators because they're literally the size of one human being.
Yeah, that makes me think of actually, there's a guy in New York I've been sort of obsessed with for a while, and he calls himself the couch doctor. And so, people would buy couches that were too big for New York walk-ups. And so he was able to like saw them in enough pieces that he could get them up an elevator and then reassemble them without
Wow.
falling apart again. And I just thought that was kind of amazing.
Yeah, that's wow. I'm sorry, I have to go back to ad copy for a minute, right? How Otis had incredible ads. I'll have to, we'll share some on the website.
Yeah.
One of my favorites was something like Skyline brought to you by Otis.
Oh,
Right,
nice.
like literally the skyline of your city is
Yeah.
due to Otis, which is 100% true, honestly.
Yeah.
But anyway, apparently the truck lift company that was used in the Louvre heist, apparently they're using that for the ads now.
No.
If it's good enough for the Louvre heist, it's good enough for your furniture, I guess.
That's amazing.
Okay, one more thing about Paris, and then we can talk about escalators.
Yeah,
maybe?
I do want to talk about escalators.
Of course, what's the most famous elevator in Paris?
Going up the Eiffel Tower, I
Yes,
assume.
of course, going up the Eiffel Tower. So Eiffel was no dum-dum himself, right? Very famous engineer. And when he had the Eiffel Tower built, absolutely understood that you needed an elevator in order to go up to the top of that thing. I've gone up to the second story, which I believe is 18 stories total. Never again. It was a lot. They don't even let you go up to the third story anymore because people had heart attacks too many times.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's bad. So anyway, the thing is, going up and down the Eiffel Tower was going to be a giant puzzle because it's not straight. It's not just a vertical shaft. And in fact, this is why technically, which is a factoid I just love to bandy around for no reason whatsoever, is that they're not elevators. They're actually funiculars. So, Ray, do you want to tell everybody the difference between an elevator, a train, and a funicular?
Oh my goodness. I don't know. I think you're probably a better expert, but I will talk about something related after you talk about the funicular.
Okay. So, I mean, it's actually relatively straightforward. If it goes up and down, it's an elevator. If it goes, horizontally, it's a train. And if it goes diagonally up and down, then it's a funicular. Or if you're from Pittsburgh, I guess they don't call them that. They call them inclines.
Right.
But an incline is just a funicular.
Yeah.
Okay. And isn't it a great word? Don't you just want to say it? It's
I
a
love
great
funiculars.
word.
Yes. But I will say, so in looking at extraordinary elevators for this podcast, there's also something called an inclinator.
How is that different from a funicular?
It's not, but I just like the term.
but there's literally fun in funicular.
Yeah, but it's Las Vegas, so they had to create something new.
Of course they did,
Yes.
Las Vegas.
So in the Luxor Hotel, which
Oh,
is
right.
bringing
It's a
this kind of
pyramid.
full circle, it's a pyramid, and so they have funiculars or the inclinators.
The inclinators, yeah.
And the inclinators actually lift you up to your room at a 29-degree angle. So, pretty steep.
Yeah,
And you can actually, kind of see them, like you can watch them go up and down
funky.
the inside of the
Yeah.
building. And I will... listeners, I will show Andy a picture of the inside because I'm assuming you've never been to the Luxor.
If I did, I'm not a Las Vegas person. Oh man, that is amazing though. God.
So
man,
listeners, I
love it.
have been to Las Vegas multiple times, both for fun and for work, because for a while it was a really inexpensive place to have conferences.
Is that a ziggurat inside?
Yeah. It's everything. And they even have like an ancient Egyptian kind of exhibit inside the Luxor. So you can see, sort of reproductions of artifacts while you're listening to like all of the jingle of the machines. It's everything that you imagine.
Wow. It's like brutalism and consumerism and Las Vegas and too much alcohol. I bet it smells like cigarettes in there.
Oh, it smells awful, but it's fascinating. So this is the kind of thing, this is like going to, sports for me, right? Like,
Yeah.
I love watching the psychology and how people interact in these places. And this was one of I actually had to stay in this place because I was like, I need to have a room that's off of the inclinator. I have to.
I stayed in the Contemporary in Disney World once.
Oh, cool.
And I don't think their elevators were diagonal, but the inside of them, and of course, this Brutalist is beautiful.
Yeah.
I do love it when elevators are visible and have glass walls and stuff. Glass floors I like less. Although, speaking of the Eiffel Tower, they do have glass block floors.
Do they?
Yeah.
Oh, that totally
Yeah.
freaks me out. I'm not okay with that.
Or they did. I don't know if they still do, I guess.
Yeah.
But anyway, so when Eiffel built this thing, he was like, yeah, I don't know how to do this. So he hired the Otis company, and Otis himself, I think, was still around. No, 1889. He might have passed already, but he definitely the Otis company.
Yeah.
And they engineered the funicular because again, it goes at an angle, right? It's not straight up and down.
It's going up the legs.
Mm-hmm. And it's a really complex system, and it's been changed since. So I don't think it's still the original Otis system anymore. Well, for one, I mean, they have to carry people much faster and everything now, but it's still this pulley system. It's not a hydraulic system in the Eiffel Tower. It is definitely a counterweight cable system.
That makes sense.
But they did use that, and of course my favorite story about that is that Hitler really desperately wanted a picture at the top of the Eiffel Tower. And somehow the cables were all broken. Oh no!
Magically, they just didn't work.
They didn't work, and so he was given the opportunity to walk up the whole thing, and he was like, "No." And then apparently they put up like the biggest Nazi flag they could up to the top, and within 24 hours, it had somehow flown away. They weren't exactly sure. Anyway,
the
but
French resistance is so
yes,
awesome.
you gotta love just sabotaging, Sabotage comes from a French word anyway. So sabot is the French word for clog. So they would literally throw clogs into the machinery, and that's what the word sabotage comes from.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So
Fun
Yay.
factoids.
That is totally fun fact.
But anyway, when you go to the top of the Eiffel Tower, when you take that elevator, technically a funicular, you have to think like Elisha Otis, man. Elisha Otis changing the world.
Okay. So Elisha Otis also changed the world, had a hand in it at least with escalators.
Yes, that's where the word comes from.
So escalators are, moving staircases, essentially. And so they move people in an efficient way, probably more efficient, honestly, than an elevator if you're just, if it's just people, it's not stuff. And so when I was digging around, what I found was the very first escalator-like machine is from 1859. So literally like right after Otis creates the safety elevator, they're like, hey, maybe we can make stairs move. Maybe people will like that. And it was invented by a man named Jesse Reno in Massachusetts. And it was steam powered, right? And he is trying to figure out ways to use this and improve it and everything else for a long time. He doesn't patent it until 1892, which I think is kind of amazing. And then in 1897, the first commercial moving staircase escalator was made in cooperation with the Otis Elevator Company by a man named Charles Seeberger. So basically, Otis has done everything. They've had that company has had their hand in all of this engineering, just every aspect of it. And listeners, I adore a good escalator. I really do. I think they're super cool. I love the way, it's kind of like an open glass elevator, right? Because you can see everything moving. You can see, people going by. And partially it may be because I grew up outside of Washington, D.C., and the metro system in D.C. is created in the mid-20th century, right, the 1970s. So we have all of this high-tech stuff, and it has the longest single-span escalator in the Western Hemisphere as part of the Washington
Is the one at DuPont Circle?
Nope.
Which one is it?
It is the Wheaton Metro Station on the Red Line.
Oh.
And it is 230 feet long.
Yeah, there are parts of the DC escalators where I hold on for dear life. And I'm not a hold on for dear life kind of person on escalators usually. But yeah, some of those are way long. And please, dear listeners, if you are not an urbanite, please, please, please stand to the right.
Yes.
Walk to the left.
Yeah.
This is the most important rule. And don't stand at the top of elevators or escalators or stairs.
Just get out of the way.
Get out of the way. Yeah, very important rule.
I'm not sure many people are actually walking. I mean, I'm sure there's some.
No, not that one.
But the Wheaton Metro Station takes 2 minutes, 54 seconds to ascend.
That's an eternity.
Yeah, 3 minutes. Can you imagine, you're just staring up and up and up for 3 minutes? Yeah.
Yeah, you got to listen to music. It can't even be a punk song. You got to you got to do something, Freebird or something. So, speaking of escalators, moving sidewalks were also a big part of this technology in the late 19th century. A big reason why the moving sidewalks did not catch on, by the way, because they were presented at a bunch of the world's fairs, including the one in Paris in 1889, is that women's dresses were a huge problem for moving sidewalks. And that was a big reason why they kind of didn't catch on in a lot of areas. I also want to talk about one elevator that I've never actually ridden in real life, and that I am extraordinarily curious about and desperately want to ride, but also think maybe there's a reason that these did not catch on. And I didn't realize they had a name until I just looked them up, but they're called paternoster lifts because of the idea is that you have a chance to, I guess, read the Lord's Prayer while you're getting on it. I guess that I'm serious, because I guess it's more because it looks like rosary beads, not because you think you might die. But
well, it depends. Probably.
Column A, column B. But this is a continuously moving elevator. So it's an elevator where there's a bunch of cars that are just constantly moving up and down, up and down. And so you can get on and off at any floor. You find a car that's, mostly empty, and it goes relatively slow. So it's not for very tall buildings. But the idea is that, you get on and off and it doesn't stop. And this, I think, only exists in the Czech Republic. I've never seen one of these in real life.
Okay, I was going to say, I've never even heard of them.
I've seen videos of them in operation before, but they just seem like a terrible, terrible accident waiting to happen. I mean, I think, the Lord's Prayer might be a good idea, just as a prophylactic. Just like if you're getting on that thing, you gotta watch all your extremities.
It makes me think of a ski lift, but vertically.
Yes. exactly right. But of course this did not catch on because
Yeah.
like it's not in any way safe, but
No.
it's pretty cool.
I could see it being good for stuff, not humans.
I mean, I think they exist in like office buildings and places where
Yeah.
people are moving around a lot, but
Right.
they're not moving with like, furniture or packages or,
Right.
children, pets.
Yeah.
There's none of that. It's
Yeah.
just adult people moving from
Yeah.
one place to another place. And maybe again, I would love to ride in one of these once and hopefully hold on to all my extremities, but not, not forever.
Yeah. Okay. Now that's on my list of ones that I want to ride. Another extraordinary elevator that I don't know if you've been on or not is the St. Louis Gateway Arch.
I've never been to St. Louis.
It is very cool. So
But isn't that also a funicular?
it's not technically a funicular. It works on a principle like a Ferris wheel.
Ooh, okay.
Because it's it allows it to stay level as you are ascending the
Right.
always changing kind of angle on the inside.
Because it's a curve.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, so they call it different things, but I think maybe the most accurate is tram. That they call it a tram. So it's it's on a cable,
Right.
But you are, I think, suspended from above, so it allows you to balance, so that you're always upright. So you're not.
So
getting
it really is
seasick
like a
and-
ski lift.
Yeah, yeah,
Funky.
yeah. It was many years ago, and I so want to go back. I actually watched a whole documentary on the creation of the arch. It's spectacular. So
Oh yeah, I'm gonna have to check that out. I've been wanting to go to St. Louis for many years, so that's next on the list. I know
Yeah.
when I got to go to Pittsburgh, I was like a kid in a candy
Oh
store.
my God,
I was so
Pittsburgh is
excited.
fantastic. Yeah, Pittsburgh's much closer, so.
It is a lot easier to get to. Yeah.
Yeah. And the last really cool elevator I wanted to talk about is thinking about advances in elevators. So we talked about how it made big buildings and everybody be able to get up and down in tall buildings, but also elevators are for accessibility. As people have mobility concerns, you literally can't walk up, many stairs, right? And so, and lots of people now have them in their houses and that kind of thing. But there's a really cool elevator in Berkeley, California, at the Ed Roberts campus at Berkeley. The building is completely universal design. Like they, kind of threw everything at the building to try to make it as integral to the building as possible. So there's all these cool ramps that run around the inside that are, red, and they're not
Cool.
hidden oh, here's the ramp and it's kind of
Yeah,
ugly
yeah.
and retrofitted. It's it's part of the fabric of the building in the way that Sullivan was making elevators. But they have an elevator here, and I don't know that I was able to find a good picture. I have a picture, but it's, I would say, maybe not the easiest to see. But in order to make elevators more accessible for people with mobility devices, like wheelchairs in particular, when you're sitting in a wheelchair, a lot of times the buttons are too high.
Yeah.
So see if you can see what's going on in that little picture.
Are they at foot height so
Yes.
that you can kind of kick it with the wheel?
Yep. And they're big, right? They're
Yeah.
big buttons so that you can press it with your
Oh,
foot or kick
man.
it with
That
the wheel
sounds
or
like a
whatever,
blast.
or knock it with the cane or whatever. I thought it was very cool.
Okay, can I just say, number one, that is amazing. Number two, I was going to end on a bum note, and so this is way better. So I just want to say, hey, elevator designers of today, for the love of God, do this, right? Do
Yeah.
fun, large buttons that are accessible so that people using wheelchairs can use them, or little kids,
Yeah.
or, or if you're holding a bunch of groceries,
Yeah.
you can hold your groceries and not, have to fumble and try to hit the thing with your elbow, and then you hit 3 buttons at once. Because my experience with very new elevators is one that made me want to shake my fist at the sky, which is I went to this building in New York where a friend lives, and they were redoing the elevators. And by the way, if you go to a building and the elevators are covered with these thick mats, that's because someone's moving.
Yeah.
And a lot of elevators in places like New York will actually have little pins at the top of the elevator so that you can set up those mats. Some of them have service elevators, but a lot of them don't, so it's just easier. But anyway, my friend had new elevators installed, and they're all touchscreen. And I just
Oh.
wanted to cry.
Oh.
It was awful. The buttons were all, they're touchscreen, so it's not tactile at all.
Yeah.
And it's the interface is somehow terrible. and you're just but why?
Yeah.
The beautiful interface of of elevators, I mean, that's one of the things that made elevators so magical. I can still remember the buttons at the elevator at my grandmother's place in Midtown Manhattan back in the day. You know, the buttons that lit up, you know,
Yeah.
and just nobody likes touchscreens, guys. Nobody likes them. They're terrible. They're bad for access. They're just, and what happens if the electricity runs out? Oh my God. Like, at least, you know, have the call button be, you know, an actual active physical button. I hate touchscreens. Anyway, so this thing is way, way better.
Yeah.
Like, you can create incredible, fun interfaces that are going to keep having kids and, you know, everyone else. But, you know, that magic of going to an elevator when you're a kid is just, it's just such a great feeling. Like, it just makes everyday life feel, like the future. And, you know, we kind of lose that magic of the built environment sometimes. And so elevators are that thing that brings that magic back, I think.
I think so too, because you have to think about the engineering. You have to think about what's happening. You have to think about the fact that, you know, the speed and all of the things that had to come together in order to make your ascent or descent so much easier. I mean, I love elevators. They're fun.
Yeah. So go and call your next elevator, but, you know, you have to press the button to do that. You can't just call it by its name.
Well, you can try, but you probably have to press a button too.
Well, this was delightful.
It was.
Bye, Rae.
Bye, Andy.